There's a specific moment when the avoidant realizes you haven't just pulled back temporarily. You've actually given up. You're not fighting for the relationship anymore, not hoping they'll change, not waiting for them to be ready. You've genuinely let go. This realization triggers an internal collapse that happens in stages as the avoidant processes what they've lost and confronts the reality of their patterns. Here are the 7 stages of internal collapse when an avoidant realizes you've given up. Stage 1. Denial and minimization. The first stage happens when the avoidant notices you've changed but doesn't take it seriously. They tell themselves you're just setting a boundary, trying to get their attention, taking space like before. They minimize the significance because accepting you've actually given up would trigger too much anxiety. They convince themselves this is temporary, that you'll come back around. The denial includes rationalizing your behavior in ways that protect their ego. They tell themselves you're being dramatic or playing games. They decide you're trying to manipulate them or punishing them. These rationalizations allow them to dismiss your giving up as a strategy rather than accepting it as genuine. This stage can last days, weeks, or months depending on how defended the avoidant is. They maintain detachment and convince themselves everything is fine. They might even feel relieved you've stopped pursuing them. Stage 2. Testing and breadcrumbing. The second stage begins when the avoidant suspects your giving up might be real. So they test you with breadcrumbs. They send casual messages, like social media posts, reach out with minimal effort to gauge if you're still accessible. These breadcrumbs test if you've really given up and try to pull you back without being vulnerable. The testing allows the avoidant to maintain plausible deniability. If you don't respond, they can tell themselves they weren't really trying anyway. This stage continues until the avoidant gets clear evidence you've truly given up. Stage 3. Panic and urgency. The third stage hits when the avoidant finally accepts that you've genuinely given up and they might have actually lost you permanently. This triggers panic that their usual defenses can't contain. Suddenly, the distance they claimed to want feels terrifying. The independence they valued feels like isolation. The thought of you moving on with someone else or building a life without them creates urgent anxiety they're not equipped to handle. The panic includes the avoidant frantically trying to restore connection. They might reach out intensely after months of silence. They might suddenly want to talk about the relationship or express feelings they've never expressed before. They might make promises about changing or doing therapy or being different. This urgency is genuine, but it's based on panic about loss, not actual capacity for relationship, which is an important distinction. The panic stage is also where the avoidant might love bomb or make grand gestures. They're trying to prove they care, that you matter, that they want you back. But these gestures come from fear rather than growth. The avoidant is reacting to the crisis of losing you, not responding to genuine internal change. This is why, even if you take them back during this stage, the patterns often resurface once the panic subsides. Stage 4. Grief and loss. The fourth stage occurs when the avoidance panic gives way to grief as they realize their efforts aren't bringing you back. They have to sit with the reality that they've lost you, that their patterns destroyed something valuable, that this loss is permanent. This grief is devastating because the avoidant typically avoids feeling anything this deeply, but loss of you forces emotions they can't defend against. The grief includes mourning not just you, but the future they imagined might be possible. Even avoidants have fantasies about what could be if they could overcome their patterns. Losing you means losing those possibilities. They're grieving the version of themselves that could have been healthy enough to sustain relationship with you, and they're grieving the life you could have built together if they'd been capable. This stage also includes the avoidant crying, feeling lost, unable to function normally. The grief overtakes their defended structure temporarily because loss is one emotion even avoidance can't fully suppress. They're experiencing the pain they've spent their life avoiding, and it's as overwhelming as they feared. This stage can last varying lengths depending on the avoidant's capacity to feel and process emotion. Stage 5. Self-examination and shame. The fifth stage begins when the grief subsides enough for the avoidant to start examining their role in the loss. They can't blame you because you gave them chances, patience, understanding. They can't blame circumstances because the circumstances were their patterns. They have to confront that they destroyed this themselves through their inability to show up properly, and this recognition triggers deep shame. The self-examination includes the avoidant seeing their patterns clearly, maybe for the first time. They recognize how they withdrew when you needed presence, how they took you for granted when you deserved appreciation, how they ran when they should have stayed, how they prioritized their comfort over the relationship. This clarity about their patterns is painful because it means acknowledging they're the problem. The shame in this stage is profound because it touches the avoidant's core wound of feeling fundamentally flawed or unlovable. They're confronting that their patterns make them incapable of keeping people who care about them. They're seeing that the defenses they thought protected them actually created the abandonment they feared. This shame can be paralyzing and is often what motivates avoidants to seek therapy if they're going to seek it at all. Stage 6. Bargaining and false hope. The sixth stage involves the avoidant bargaining with themselves and sometimes with you about getting another chance. They tell themselves if you just came back, they'd be different this time. They imagine scenarios where they prove they've changed. They fantasize about grand gestures that would win you back. This bargaining is the avoidant's attempt to escape the pain of loss without doing the actual work of changing. The bargaining also includes the avoidant making promises to themselves. They'll go to therapy. They'll work on their patterns. They'll be the partner you needed them to be. These promises feel genuine in the moment because the avoidant genuinely wants to not feel the pain they're feeling. But wanting to change and having capacity to change are different things. The bargaining stage is full of intentions that often don't translate to action. This stage can also involve the avoidant reaching out to you with these promises and bargains. They tell you they'll change, they understand now, they know what they lost. They're hoping these words will be enough to get you back without them having to demonstrate change over time. The problem is most avoidants in this stage haven't actually done work. They're just desperately trying to escape the consequences of their patterns. Stage 7. Acceptance or return to defense. The final stage is where the avoidant either accepts the loss and genuinely commits to change, or they return to their defenses and rationalize the whole experience away. The outcome depends entirely on the individual avoidant's capacity for growth and their willingness to do uncomfortable work. For avoidants who accept the loss, this stage involves recognizing they can't get you back and choosing to work on themselves anyway. They commit to therapy, start examining their childhood wounds, develop skills for emotional intimacy. They accept that they lost you, and they might miss out on ever having real partnership if they don't change. This acceptance is painful, but it's also the beginning of actual growth. For avoidants who return to defense, this stage involves finding ways to protect their ego from the pain of the experience. They might decide you were the problem after all, that you were too needy or didn't understand them. They might minimize what you had together, tell themselves it wasn't that special. They might dive into new relationships to prove they're fine. This defensive return allows them to avoid the growth work, but it also means they'll repeat the same patterns. The split between acceptance and defense is why some avoidants change after loss while others never do. The pain of losing you creates opportunity for transformation, but opportunity doesn't guarantee change. The avoidant has to choose to use the pain as motivation rather than escaping it through defensiveness. What these stages mean for you. Understanding these stages shouldn't make you wait for the avoidant to reach acceptance and change. Most avoidants cycle through these stages and end up returning to defense rather than transforming. You can't predict which path they'll take, and your life shouldn't be on hold while they figure it out. These stages also reveal that even when the avoidant is in panic or grief and desperately wants you back, that doesn't mean they're capable of relationship with you. The desire and the capacity are separate. They can want you intensely while still being unable to meet your needs. Most importantly, these stages happen inside the avoidant, regardless of whether you're in contact. You don't need to be present for their process. Maintaining distance protects you from being pulled back into dysfunction. Why you're giving up is powerful regardless of their response. The power in giving up isn't about what it does to the avoidant. It's about what it does for you. You're choosing yourself over someone who can't show up. You're enforcing boundaries that protect your well-being. You're refusing to sacrifice yourself for someone else's potential. This choice is powerful because it means you've learned your worth isn't dependent on someone else's ability to value you properly. Your giving up also frees you to build a life aligned with your needs rather than organized around someone else's limitations. Every day you spend not hoping the avoidant will change is a day you can invest in your own growth, your own happiness, your own future. This redirection of energy from them to yourself is where real healing begins. The stages the avoidant goes through after you give up are ultimately their journey, not yours. Whether they collapse and transform or collapse and rebuild defenses is their choice and their responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself, to maintaining the boundary of being done, to building the life you deserve with people who can actually show up for you properly. Let them have their stages while you have your freedom. How long each stage lasts and what influences the timeline. The duration of each stage varies dramatically between avoidants and depends on several factors. How defended the avoidant is, how deep the connection was with you, how much support they have, and their capacity for emotional processing all influence how long they spend in each stage. Some avoidants move through all 7 stages in weeks. Others take years. Some get stuck in particular stages and never progress beyond them. The denial stage tends to last longest for highly defended avoidants who have successfully avoided emotional pain their entire lives. They can maintain denial for months or even years, convincing themselves you'll come back or that losing you wasn't significant. Less defended avoidants move through denial faster because they can't sustain the cognitive dissonance between what they're telling themselves and what they're actually feeling. The panic stage is usually the shortest because that level of activated emotion isn't sustainable. The avoidant either moves into grief to process the pain or retreats back into defense to escape it. The brief window of panic is often when avoidants make the most dramatic gestures or promises, which is why taking them back during panic is risky. The intensity comes from crisis, not transformation. The grief and shame stages can last varying lengths depending on the avoidant's relationship with their emotions. Avoidants comfortable with sadness might grieve deeply but relatively quickly. Avoidants who've never allowed themselves to grieve might get stuck in this stage for extended periods. Similarly, shame can be processed and moved through, or it can become a stuck place where the avoidant spirals without progressing. The bargaining stage often cycles. The avoidant bargains, then accepts, then returns to bargaining when acceptance feels too painful. This cycling can continue indefinitely unless the avoidant commits to genuine work or fully retreats to defense. The back and forth is part of the internal struggle between wanting to grow and wanting to protect their defended self. Why some avoidants skip stages or return to earlier ones. The 7 stages aren't necessarily linear. Some avoidants skip stages entirely, while others cycle back through earlier stages multiple times before progressing. An avoidant might move from denial straight to defense, never experiencing the grief or shame that could motivate change. Another might cycle between panic and bargaining without ever settling into genuine grief. The skipping happens when emotional defenses are strong enough to prevent certain experiences. An avoidant defended against shame might move from grief to bargaining without ever confronting their role in the loss. An avoidant terrified of vulnerability might skip panic entirely and move from testing straight to defensive rationalization when testing proves you're genuinely gone. Cycling back to earlier stages often happens when the avoidant gets triggered or overwhelmed. They might be in acceptance, doing the work when something triggers their wounds and they cycle back to denial or bargaining. They might be grieving, then panic when they see you've moved on, then return to grief once the panic subsides. This nonlinear progression is normal and reflects the complexity of changing deeply ingrained patterns. The avoidants most likely to progress through all stages to genuine acceptance are those who have support systems encouraging growth, who hit genuine rock bottom that they can't escape through defense, or who have enough distress tolerance to sit with painful emotions without immediately defending against them. But even for these avoidants, the progression isn't smooth or predictable. Signs the avoidant is in each stage and how to recognize them. You can often tell which stage the avoidant is in based on their behavior, though you may not have contact with them to observe this. In denial, they appear fine, unbothered, maybe even relieved you're gone. They're not reaching out or showing signs of distress. They're maintaining their defended presentation. During testing, you'll notice sporadic breadcrumbs, random texts, social media interactions, questions that seem casual but are actually gauging your emotional state. The breadcrumbs lack real substance or vulnerability. They're low-effort attempts to see if you're still accessible without the avoidant having to risk much. Panic presents as sudden intensity. The avoidant who was fine is suddenly reaching out constantly, expressing feelings they've never expressed, making promises about change. There's urgency and emotion that feels out of character. They might show up unannounced or make grand gestures. The energy is frantic and desperate. Grief is visible in decreased functioning. The avoidant might look physically different, tired or worn down. They're not maintaining their usual composure. If you have mutual friends, you might hear they're struggling. The grief stage is when avoidants cry, isolate, stop taking care of themselves. Their defended structure has temporarily collapsed under the weight of loss. Shame manifests as withdrawal and self-flagellation. The avoidant might express harsh self-judgment if you're in contact. They're recognizing their patterns and being brutal with themselves about it. This stage can look like depression because the avoidant is confronting painful truths about themselves they've avoided. Bargaining shows up as promises and hypotheticals. The avoidant talks about what they would do differently if given another chance. They might tell you they're starting therapy or working on themselves. They're future-focused, imagining scenarios where things work out, rather than being present with current reality. Acceptance or return to defense is evident in either genuine action toward change with no expectation of getting you back, or in rationalization and moving on to new relationships. Avoidants who've accepted are doing therapeutic work, examining patterns, growing without it being contingent on reconciliation. Avoidants who've returned to defense are back to their usual defended presentation, possibly with new narratives about why the relationship didn't work that protect their ego. Whether you should engage with the avoidant during any stage. The short answer is no, you generally shouldn't engage with the avoidant while they're going through these stages. Your engagement can actually prevent them from fully experiencing the stages, particularly grief and shame, which are necessary for potential growth. If you're present soothing their pain, they don't have to sit with the full consequences of their patterns. Engaging during panic is especially risky because panic creates intensity that feels like change but isn't. The avoidant promises everything during panic, but panic subsides, and then the capacity to follow through often wasn't actually there. Many people take avoidance back during the panic stage because the emotion feels so real, only to find themselves back in the same patterns once panic fades. Engaging during bargaining is also problematic because bargaining is about escaping pain, not about actual transformation. The avoidant wants you back to stop hurting, not because they've developed capacity for healthy relationship. Taking them back during bargaining teaches them that promises without demonstrated change are sufficient, which sets up a pattern of them promising and failing repeatedly. The only stage where engagement might be considered is acceptance, and only if the avoidant has been in acceptance long enough to demonstrate consistent change over time. If they've been in therapy for months, if they can articulate what they've learned and how they've grown, if they're not making promises but showing evidence of change, then engagement might be worth considering. But even then, it's your choice and you're under no obligation just because they've done work. The healthiest approach is to stay gone through all stages. Let them have their process without your involvement, and build your life independent of their journey. If they genuinely change and you're still interested after substantial time and demonstrated growth, that's different from engaging while they're in crisis or cycling through these stages. Why their internal collapse doesn't mean you should save them. Watching or knowing about the avoidant's internal collapse might create urge to help, comfort, or save them. This urge comes from caring about them and not wanting them to suffer. But saving them from the collapse prevents them from learning the lessons the collapse is trying to teach. The pain is the teacher. The consequences are the curriculum. Rescuing them from that process interrupts their only opportunity for growth. Your role is not to be their therapist, their savior, or their comfort during a crisis they created. Your role is to take care of yourself and maintain boundaries that protect your well-being. Their collapse is their responsibility to manage, either by doing the work to change or by finding healthy coping strategies that don't involve you. Trying to save them also puts you back in the pattern that didn't work before. You accommodating their limitations, managing their emotions, helping them through difficulty while neglecting your own needs. This dynamic is what you gave up on, and returning to it just because they're in pain doesn't change the fundamental incompatibility. The collapse will run its course whether you're involved or not. They'll either use it to transform or they'll rebuild their defenses. That outcome isn't yours to control or influence. Your job is to honor your choice to give up by staying given up, regardless of what stages they move through or how much they suffer. Their pain is real, but it's not your responsibility to alleviate.